Good morning, everybody. This is a live extreme weather briefing as we have a lot to talk about, including a conditional severe weather threat this evening, just to the northeast of a triple point. That surface low is going to peak in Kansas and then weaken as it lifts off to the northeast on Wednesday toward Iowa. But there is a threat this evening of maybe a surface-based storm, maybe a high-based storm up there just in the northeast side of that triple point. That surging cold front just to the north and northwest of the triple point is going to force some convection up there. But I'm really watching Wednesday's threat, and that's why I produced this graphic. I think that hodographs, especially across the Delta region, out here across eastern Arkansas into western Mississippi, is quite favorable for even a strong tornado threat. The HRRR is hinting at this mode developing down into eastern Texas, down near the Shreveport area by about 4 p.m., and then lifting off to the east-northeast across northern Louisiana into southern Arkansas, where there is quite favorable thermodynamics and a low-level jet pop and a maximum to 700 millibar winds right across this region. So when those storms develop off to the southwest and move into this environment, especially near about 5 or 6 p.m., those hodographs really broaden out there across the Mississippi River Valley, out ahead of that cluster of storms. There definitely is quite a bit of uncertainties regarding the thermodynamics, and I know that the HRRR and those convective allowing models are showing kind of a messy evolution of that convection with some stratiform rain advecting out ahead of the main convective line. But I think that this elevated mix layer on the south side of this bowling ball of a storm system is going to overspread those mid-60s dew points surging northward to the Mississippi River Valley. I think that's going to lead to more breaks in the clouds than are being indicated by the models, and I do think that there is a threat of isolated supercells to develop from this mode coming out of East Texas, northern Louisiana, into southern Arkansas, and then eventually approaching the Mississippi River Delta out here as well, southeastern Arkansas, east central Arkansas, into western Missouri. Definitely seems likely on Wednesday. But this afternoon, this evening, there also is a conditional threat for a high-base storm up to the northeast of that triple point in Kansas. But first, I wanted to show you this textbook hodograph that's representative of the environment in the Delta. This one is pretty close to that intersection of Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. But you can see this large looping hodograph right there, and a storm motion that's largely east-northeast, sufficiently right to generate a lot of storm relative helicity within that hodograph curve. And this hodograph right here is the reason why I'm going to be chasing Wednesday afternoon and evening across the Delta. You can see the 1 kilometer wind in excess of 40 knots and a pretty backed low-level jet at that, despite these relatively easterly storm motions here. And then your 2 kilometer wind bends all the way back to the due southwest and accelerating above 50 knots. And then you've got this strong mid and upper level flow, 40, 50, 60 knots up there. More than sufficient bulk shear to evacuate rain and hail from the updraft, but you can see this relatively weaker surface wind there too, near 10 knots, creating 30 knots of 0 to 1 kilometer wind shear. This is that surface wind, just a slight backing of that south-southeast surface wind at about 10 knots. Just above the ground, you've got south-southwest at 40 knots. And the difference between those two vectors is about 30 knots there. And with this storm motion off to the east, you're going to be bringing in largely purely streamwise vorticity as well within that layer, within the 0 to 1 kilometer layer, 0 to 500 meter layer, what have you. And also you can see some relatively steep lapse rates here at the very low levels, despite this saturated layer. Let me shimmy this image so that you can see the sounding portion. And I picked this sounding because it's a little bit further south. There's a little bit removed from the cloud cover and that stratiform rain that precedes much of the convection across eastern Arkansas. This is a little bit further south near that intersection of Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And you do have some decent low-level cape here, suggesting that there are some breaks in the clouds despite this saturated layer right here as well. So even with this saturated layer, you still get temperatures into the 70s with those mid to upper 60s dew points streaming northward through the Mississippi River Delta. But this saturated layer is definitely a weakness of the setup. If you had a stout dry punch coming in here in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, you'd likely erode this dry layer, leading to some more breaks in the clouds, but erode that saturated layer, I should say. But this right here is indicative of low-level clouds some of that stratiform precipitation that precedes that environment with slightly higher thermodynamics. But you got a lot of directional shear, a lot of speed shear in the low levels, and with a hodograph like that, you just got to chase it, because if a storm can carve out even a marginally sufficient low-level thermodynamic environment, it is going to have a chance of producing tornadoes. You can see a pretty weak capping inversion as well. Hardly any cap out there, and that's why an abundance of storms in messy convective modes is being suggested by the convective allowing models, which certainly is a negative factor of this setup. But anytime you have such a favorable hodograph like that, and marginally sufficient thermodynamics even, it definitely does mean that there is a tornado threat Wednesday late afternoon and evening. But back to today, I was thinking about chasing this setup as well. Did have a rental car in Oklahoma City here. This is this evening at 0Z with this triple point surface low sagging into southwestern Kansas. You then get a pretty stout cold front on the backside. Here's the cold front. You can see all these northerly winds on the backside of that triple point. Usually this time of year, the cold fronts with these systems will often dominate even more so than the models will indicate, but they can force some convection just to the north of the triple point, and that's where a majority of the convective initiation happens, along this surging cold front, not along the dry line to the south, across far southwestern Kansas into western Oklahoma. That environment remains capped, according to the models, with no supercell storms developing along it. It's because of this marginal moisture, too, with dew points in the upper 50s mainly. I think if we had low 60s dew points, 62, 63s over here, slightly deeper moisture, we'd probably be talking about a pretty substantial tornado threat with this setup. And if this were to happen in late April or May with better moisture, then I think that we'd be talking about a pretty big-time tornado event. But we're still a little bit early in the season, still working the Mid-South, and that's why on Wednesday I'm going to be targeting eastern Arkansas, southeastern Arkansas, maybe even northern Missouri there along the I-20 corridor. But here's this setup. You can see that surface low, a deep surface low as well, a 993 surface low there. And we do have quite a stout low-level jet here, and a beautiful shape to this, a due southerly low-level jet here. So even with this cold front surging back behind and to the north of the triple point, you do have a pretty north-south boundary up there along that cold front that could allow these storms to form and maybe charge into that low-level jet just a little bit. But there is a really stout cap out there. Here's a surface-based cape. Instability in excess of 2,000. A nice cape axis extending up to the triple point and to the east of that front. You can look at the surface-based SIN here. And there definitely is some convective inhibition up here just to the east of this surging cold front. See the frontal inversion here, rapidly, dramatically increasing the convective inhibition just behind that cold frontal passage. And you can see some slight holes in the SIN, or the convective inhibition up here. That's where that lighter color is, the yellows. That shows where you get convective inhibition between minus 50 and even minus 100 joules per kilogram, basically anti-cape. Out there is convective inhibition. A lot of cap down here right along that dry line too, especially at 0Z. Just not enough convergence along that dry line to force convection even over that cap. This is the area I'd be watching if we had deeper moisture. I'd probably be targeting western Oklahoma into southwestern Kansas, maybe near the Oklahoma-Kansas border. But you can definitely see that convective inhibition just to the east of those storms, even at 0Z at 7 p.m. Not much, actually, in the way of SIN. You can see just a little ripple here. This is the parcel ascent, 77 over 56, so you're going to be talking about 20 degree dew point spreads. Slightly higher base storms, but not terrible. And you do get quite convective available potential energy here. Quite a bit of cape just above that subtle capping inversion. But that's you could easily overcome that capping inversion, but I suspect that after 0Z, you're going to lose this daytime heating rapidly with these dew point spreads and develop just a little bit of a stable layer right near the surface. But some decent hodographs there, showing sufficient shear for even some supercell storms. Let's look a little bit further south along the dry line. And you're approaching 25 degree temperature dew point spreads there. Just a little bit of a subtle cap. You're going to bend those temperatures back dramatically after 0Z and lead to a stable layer, but not as robust of a cap as I expected, even just to the east of the dry line when I initially pulled up these soundings. Here you can see a nicely curved hodograph here showing that prime kinematic environment to the east of the dry line in western Oklahoma. But to take advantage of this wind shear, you need a storm. So if you're not going to get a storm out there, you're not going to have a tornado to take advantage of those shear profiles, transport heat aloft and to the poles. Looks like a bit of a sin hole here too, further east. No capping inversion. So the capping inversion does look a little bit weaker on the 6Z HRRR. I'm waiting patiently as the 12Z should be about to come in here in the next hour and a half or so. But it does look quite a bit better than I thought it was going to. There you can see these dew points. So those sin holes a little bit further east where the deeper moisture is located, where those near 60 dew points are found. So if we definitely had a solid pipe here of low 60s dew points, we'd be talking about a substantial severe weather event. But this is your storm right here at 7 p.m., just to the northeast of the Triple Point, maybe near the Great Bend area there, just to the southeast of 70. You get these elevated storms getting forced by the front into southern Nebraska. This has the potential of being a surface-based storm down there near the Great Bend area. Peaks a little bit by about 8 p.m. Probably a beautiful mothership structure there. A lot of lightning as well with this storm system. Some elevated storms along the I-70 corridor to the north in Kansas around Russell. Now this storm is going to be quite a beautiful mothership right there. We can look at a sounding just in the inflow region and look at this large looping hodograph with that 1 kilometer wind, the low-level jet, even greater than 50 knots there. Quite a largely curved hodograph, and that's going to really force those beautiful mothership storms. That capping inversion does grow just a little bit stronger by 8 p.m. as you're losing that surface heating. You can see a little shallow stable layer there right near the ground. That's probably going to lead to some beautifully sculpted updrafts there at sunset in central Kansas. There's your elevated mix layer for the Tuesday setup. That could make Wednesday an outbreak if this elevated mix layer were able to propagate east-southeast into the mid-south, but this is going to lift up toward Iowa, northern Missouri. And the surface low is going to weaken after peaking here in southwestern Missouri. As it lifts up toward Iowa, it's going to weaken a bit. And usually when you have a weakening surface low, rapidly filling in surface low like this, lifting off to the northeast, you don't really get that arc of supercells that produces a lot of tornadoes into Iowa and northern Missouri. That's why I'm targeting the southern mode tomorrow down into eastern Arkansas, southeastern Arkansas, northern Missouri. Still have that storm hanging on at 9 p.m. These are obviously outflow dominant, have created a cold pool. This one's still trying to hang on. Should have a beautiful updraft on the southern end there. Then you can see it start to peter out there by 10 p.m. Becomes elevated. So between about 7 and 10 p.m., there should be the evolution of a beautiful, high-based, likely striated supercell. Tornado threat is quite low, despite those beautiful kinematics just to the east of it. I think that the thermodynamics just aren't going to quite line up for this storm to be a tornado producer. Kind of the northeast of the Triple Point, too. This surging cold front kind of pinches off at Triple Point, closer to the Kansas-Oklahoma border after 7 p.m. as we get a little closer to evening. This cold front slowly begins to dominate. But that dying supercell that's lifting off to the northeast is still on the northern nose of this low-level jet. As that low-level jet increases just after 0Z, you never know what can happen when you get a 50 to 60 knot low-level jet pumping into an LP storm with 15 to 20 degree dew point spreads. It could still result in a tornado out there across central Kansas by about 9 p.m. Look at that low-level 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity blow up in response to that increasing low-level jet after evening. You can see the best kinematics are down here east of the dry line into western Oklahoma, but the models are just not convecting that dry line. You need about 5 degrees higher of a dew point out there across western Oklahoma. And we'd be talking about a pretty substantial tornado threat up there. Nevertheless, though, that storm into central Kansas definitely has my eye. It's right on the gradient there of that low-level jet, right on the nose of that 50 to 55 knot low-level jet in there, 7 to 9 p.m. By 10 p.m., it begins to weaken as it lifts up toward the I-70 corridor. So if I was in Norman, Oklahoma for this, I would definitely be chasing this event and southeastern Arkansas. But I'm coming from the southeast, given my focus on the Mid-South and Dixie Alley during this early season. That's how I decided to base out of this zone, and it's been relatively active during March. It's definitely led to some more convenient intercepts so far. I've really only achieved success so far in the Texas Panhandle. That was on March 13th. When we got really close to that EF2 tornado up there to the north of Clarendon. And since then, I've been seeing tornadoes. I've just been far away. I've been a little bit out of position, and I've been so focused on that subsonic sensor as well that I haven't been able to get. And then I ended up just behind that Brent wedge tornado as it came into Brent. And you saw that live stream where the trees were down. That's actually from an old decommissioned radar site there, an old weather station on the southwest side of Brent that was hit in 1974 during a big tornado outbreak, and it was sustained a direct hit once again on March 25th, 2021 from that long track EF3 tornado that went through Brent and Centerville, Alabama, touching down first near the Greensboro area. But I have a feeling I'm going to get a tornado down here in the Delta, southeastern Arkansas on Wednesday, late afternoon and evening tomorrow. And I'm going to be bringing the subsonic back out there. I've got to put it back together under Mark's guidance. Hopefully it works after getting submerged in the mud water down there to the north of Clarksdale, south of Tunica. If it works, I'll be collecting subsonic data once again inside this event. And I am still struggling just a little bit with some bugs here after this latest Facebook update. That's why there's no video description on this live. That's why I can't go live yet on my mobile device. But I'm hoping that gets fixed as well. And I know there are some comments on my Storm Chase EDU classes. I do plan on resuming those. Kind of been in a mental funk since these last Mid-South chases. The double high-risk event needed to recharge the adrenal glands. But I do plan on resuming those Storm Chase EDU classes. I think there's a chance that we could get a death ridge that builds in the rest of April here as well. So I think there's going to be a long-term quiet period that should give me an opportunity to finish the rocket paper and resume the Storm Chase EDU classes again. I do plan these to be year-round. They're just going to be more sporadic during tornado season as I shift mentally into pure storm chasing mode out here. Sometimes it's hard to shift back and do that computer work. Just pure focus on trying to find the next target, covering those distances, reserving a little bit of energy for the chases as well to avoid burnout, eating a lot of fiber. And that's why I plan on targeting southeastern Arkansas into northern Louisiana there Wednesday, late afternoon and evening. But it is nice to see a beautiful dry line out here. This is a 0 to 1 kilometer EHI, which really shows an incredible environment across western Oklahoma. But this is why you don't want to just use the composite indices when you're making your forecast, or you'd be out in western Oklahoma likely experiencing a clear sky bust, just sampling that tight dry line, drive back and forth across it with a Dominator weather station to measure that dew point drop from east to west, needing to be in excess of 7 degrees C to really define a dry line, but that's as textbook as it gets right there. Showing that dew point drop into the teens, single digits behind this dry line. And this is why later on this summer, there's going to be a major wildfire threat across the high plains from south to north and the mountains. La Niñas are often dry, hot summers, and usually progressive systems with active severe weather, but not big rainmakers across the plains. So I expect that we're going to have a mega heat wave this summer and a drought across the high plains. Not the normal active high plains that we had before 2020 when we were chasing tornadoes through July and August out here, even into September across southeastern Wyoming, northeastern Colorado, and the Nebraska Panhandle. But I do think the southern plains are going to wake up late April into May, as they always do. We just have kind of a cleaned out Gulf of Mexico a bit from the active hurricane season and from these active events in the Mid-South and the Dixie Alley. And I keep doing that. Just does not convect at all along that dry line in western Oklahoma. And then you can see this complex die out, bunch of outflow surging out from even that beautiful mothership that could evolve along the southern end. I'll be going live on my drive out to eastern and southeastern Arkansas, breaking down that event as it's happening in real time. Well, look at that convective inhibition dominating here by 4Z. That's why those storms die out by 10 p.m. Once you get in excess of about 100, minus 100 sin, that's when they start to die. Although the Greensburg tornado was able to produce some triple-digit convective inhibition up there in southwestern Kansas. And this is by 9 p.m. when that thing is really going to start weakening. But there is a narrow window here, 7, 8, 9 p.m. Probably will fire at about 6 p.m. within this sin hole here. You got this cold front that's surging, a little bit greater convergence along the cold front just to the north of the triple point. The triple point remains capped. Just not enough of a convective inhibition hole, a hole in that convective inhibition to generate a sustained updraft down here along the dry line. So let's pivot now to Wednesday's setup. And this is 0Z on Wednesday, and you can see basically no cap out here across eastern Arkansas, northern Louisiana, all the way back toward eastern Texas, across western Mississippi. That's at 0Z. And that's why the HRRR is showing such a messy convective evolution out here. No cap anywhere. And definitely a lot of lift, cyclonic curvature. You've got the front back here as well. And that's why there's not as much 0 to 3 kilometer cape out here, because the HRRR just convects blobs of convection all over the place, preceded by this relatively stratiform rain. And I don't really buy this run of the HRRR. I think that there's likely going to be this line of supercells with more clear air out ahead of it, even some breaks in the clouds, especially over southeastern Arkansas. I think you're going to have a couple monster HP supercells into northern Louisiana, including along the I-20 corridor, including some supercells migrating out of far east Texas down there as well. But a beautiful arc of convection. Notice how up here across Iowa into northern Missouri, it looks quite messy as well. Even if you go in relatively early, around 19Z, you can see some messy convective evolution. And that's because you have a weakening surface low lifting off to the northeast that peaked over southwestern Kansas. Just not an intensifying surface low with a nice tight southeasterly low-level jet over top easterly surface winds out there to get that nice arc of convection. You really need that elevated mix layer to blast into this region that you often will get with more of an open wave. This is more of a closed upper level low, working with relatively marginal moisture. Could see some tornadoes maybe down into south central Missouri, into north central Arkansas, into the Ozarks out there. Got a decent 40 knot low level jet, even at 19Z. So it does look like supercell storms get going pretty early with this relatively weaker cap across southern Missouri into northern Arkansas. But look at this pop in the low level jet down into southern Arkansas, northwestern Missouri, or northwestern Louisiana. That's at 21Z, 3 p.m. Central Time. And let's watch the migration of that, and evolution of that southern branch of the low level jet, migrating into southeastern Arkansas by 21Z. So this is at 4 p.m., and you're going to have storms initiating south central Arkansas back into northwestern Louisiana. And when these move into this strongly sheared environment, if they're surface-based, and it looks like they will be, I think there is going to be pretty dangerous environment, a volatile environment out here across eastern, southeastern Arkansas into northeastern Louisiana ahead of those storms, despite the messy convective mode. And even up here across southern Missouri into northern Arkansas and the Ozarks, still a chance of some tornadoes up there as well. You can see your 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity approaching 200 up there with this isolated mode and a relatively north-south orientation of that cold front with west-southwesterly upper level winds too. Those storms should be easily able to move off that boundary. And you can see the enhancement of the 0 to 1 kilometer helicity over southeastern Arkansas into northern and northeastern Louisiana there. That's at 21Z. There you can see that greater low-level shear spreading over eastern Arkansas. Incredible storm-chasing terrain out there. That's at 22Z at 5 p.m. And you can see how blobby it is. The models definitely do have a lot of little convection out here. And this 6Z run of the HRRR, if you believe this is going to be a messy mode and maybe some embedded tornadoes within these storms across southern Arkansas into northern Louisiana. But I don't really buy this. I think that this is going to be just a little bit more cleared out than it appears, especially here across southeastern Arkansas into northeastern Louisiana. I think that this is probably more of the thermodynamics you're going to see. Notice this steeper 0 to 3 kilometer cape here. And a lot of that is also due to this late arrival of the moisture. And you can see a lot of stable air dominating Mississippi. So the severe weather threat in Mississippi is really going to be focused right along the delta. You have a lot of stable air taking over the rest of the mid-south here. Dew points in the 40s out ahead of this. This is why Thursday is probably going to be a nothing burger, and just the general shape of the upper system being a bowling ball lifting up toward the upper Midwest is relatively unfavorable. But you can see this pipe of even upper 60s dew points streaming northward within that low-level jet. Mid to upper 60s, 65 to 67 out here across southeastern Arkansas. But then that moisture really dies out just to the east of the delta. So these storms are probably going to approach the Mississippi River, similar to that last event that we chased. And then those storms are going to lose their tornado threat as they pass into deeper into western Mississippi. And that's probably what is causing that messy convection that develops, is kind of the squeeze play between this stable air here, this moisture coming up with a strong low-level jet, and a front that's also arriving. That squeeze play between these two environments is just going to lead to a relatively messy convective mode out there. Now look at that. You do get those upper 60s dew points migrating inland, Clarksdale, Tunica, even up toward Memphis. Already waking up. Sending text messages. So that's a pretty favorable hodograph by 0Z here. But it looks like there's a relatively weaker low-level jet by that time. Look at the squeeze play with that low-level jet by 0Z. So maybe a small environment here across eastern Arkansas into western Mississippi, but these events are not looking that favorable for a significant tornado threat, that's for sure, and especially not a nocturnal one. I think that these storms are going to run into the river here, and then the low-level jet lifts to the north through eastern Missouri into southwestern Illinois. Look at those holes. Well, this is definitely indicative of some shallower moisture too. But this system overall is going to be nothing like the previous ones with those high risks. You basically have a conditional threat for the development of an LP mothership supercell in central Kansas, maybe near the Great Bend area. And then you've got this evolution of a small environment across southeastern Arkansas, maybe into western Mississippi there, maybe down into northern Louisiana where there could be a tornado. Given those forecast hodographs, those largely curved hodographs, I do think that there is going to be some tornadoes. There are going to be some tornadoes out here. Relatively weak front as well, moving off to the east. But I'm interested to see what the 12Z models will show in this environment. You got to chase it, though. That's what you do this time of year. You chase. It's April, for heaven's sakes. So here is my target area. More over southeastern Arkansas. And the 12Z models come out and show a little bit less of that stratiform precipitation ahead of the convective line. Then I think that there is a more robust chance of a tornado threat. We'll probably then see this zone here, southeastern Arkansas into northern Louisiana, get upgraded to an enhanced risk. It's possible that you could get a couple of early tornadoes around 2-3 p.m. up here with this convective line into the Ozarks of southern Missouri into north central Arkansas as well. But overall, definitely looking like a little bit lower end of a setup, but it only takes one tornado to cause problems. Keep that in mind. And when you have those hodographs, if there is a tornado, it's probably going to be a damaging and a strong one out here, especially in this environment. If breaks in the clouds can develop, and if breaks in the clouds develop even further north in this zone across northeastern Arkansas, even up toward Memphis, could be in play. But I do think I'm going to have to target the Arkansas side. I think that's the only place where there's going to be favorable thermodynamics. There's a lot of dry air just to the east of the Mississippi. You'll probably get some decent moisture streaming up across the Mississippi River, and those storms will probably be crossing the river, maybe with tornado warnings, and then they'll just turn into these HP blobs as they move into and across the rest of northern Mississippi and die out pretty quickly with that stable air, really saving the Mid-South from a bigger severe weather event on Thursday. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to my weather report this morning. I'm going to send a couple more emails to Facebook support and try to get some of these problems resolved so I can start getting video descriptions on these. Get back to slinging content through my mobile device. Got like 2 burner phones now so I can improve my live streaming. Never stop chasing, everybody. That's what we're going to do. Heading out this morning to target eastern Arkansas, southeastern Arkansas, into northern Louisiana. Have a great Tuesday. Never stop chasing.